Hello, my name is Monster Hunter, and I'm talking about more weapons that are garbage. Last week I set up a baseline for weapons whose file type betrays the stats that could have made them just as great as their meta peers. I mentioned the factors that determine a switch axe's worth aren't just raw and element, but sharpness, affinity, file type, decoration slots. However, there are a few weapons out there with incredible stats that are somehow overshadowed by their meta-based peers. This video's thematic focus is on weapons that almost made the cut. So let's do this. There are a total of 8 stats that make up a switch axe, and it only takes one of those being trash to make it less viable than its competition. Tons of weapons have reasons as to why they're bad, while others have issues that create a snowball effect of one awful stat highlighting all the other issues. Last episode I spoke about Abyssal Torrent, the Geismagorm switch axe, which had a poor element stat that wouldn't have been an issue had the weapon not been element file. That's really all it took to make the weapon go from great to worthless. Though, even if it had been power file, it still might have lost to the Chaotic Gore switch axe for a reason you probably can guess. Which leads us to the first weapon of the bunch, one whose stats rival that of its competitor but still can't cross the threshold for one simple reason. And no, it's not the Rampage slot this time, but actually, it's Sharpness. Sharpness affects your ability to strike a monster part and is also a factor in the damage calculation. On screen now is a table of values representing the increase to raw and element per Sharpness level. A weapon that is strictly raw or status has an inconsequential loss when going from purple to white, as it's just a simple 0.07 difference. That isn't the case with element, as it suffers a loss of 0.12. This can affect a decent amount of an elemental weapon's damage output. If it weren't for that, the Lightning Shredder, a general material weapon, would have stood evenly against its competitor, the Oppressor's Torrent, the Zinogre switch axe. Look at these base stats in comparison with one another. The Lightning Shredder is 20 raw higher, has a defense bonus, level 3 decoration slot, and base level 3 Rampage decoration slot. It may have 9 less element, but the real loss here is the fact that it can't reach purple sharpness. Here's an example of a combo for both axes, and you can see the minor difference between them at max augment slots. This sees the Oppressor's Torrent getting higher damage dealt over time compared to Lightning Shredder. The benefit that Shredder does have is, again, the level 3 decoration slot. For Oppressor's Torrent, you would need to slot in for a level 1 Rampage slot upgrade and then the rest of your augments. Lightning Shredder doesn't have to sacrifice slots and can go for the crispy level 4 attack boost and level 2 element boost, bringing it to a whopping 395 base raw and 58 element. Yet, when you compare them with max slots, it's still not enough. Even with higher base raw, a defense boost, and a base level 3 rampage slot, that slight difference in sharpness is precisely why it's not considered meta like Oppressor's Torrent. That isn't to say that it is entirely useless. You're allowed to use whatever weapon you want to complement how you play, because this weapon didn't get entirely overshadowed like last episode's weapons, but instead just barely missed the mark to be considered meta. The next weapon suffers a similar fate as the aforementioned Lightning Shredder, but both the weapon and its competitor actually lose out to the Amatsu axe. No surprises here, it's a water element, and I'm not going to sit here and drag it out for you, but it is the Delix Hatchet. The base stats for these are actually pretty solid, with 350 base raw, 25 water element, minimal white sharpness, 2 level 1 decoration slots, base level 3 rampage slot, and thank God, it's power file. I won't hype you up with a long-winded value chart for this weapon, so I'm just going to go ahead and reveal the max augment slots on screen. This thing has nice damage. 375 base raw, but the element could use a little bit of oomph at a piddly 43. Its competitor is another water-based power file weapon, the Megaton Shears, which is the Daimyo Hermitar axe. Daimyo Hermitar sits at 10 less raw, 11 more element, similar sharpness, 2 level 2 deco slots, and base level 3 rampage slot. Their stats are so similar that their augment slots look the same: level 4 attack boost and level 2 element boost. So then, what one thing makes the Dellet Hatchet bad? Well, it's two things actually, and they compound into one another. Unlike Lightning Shredder and Oppressor's Torrent, the Deluxe Hatchet and the Megaton Shears are both white sharpness, but the Megaton Shears wins out because it has the potential to reach purple sharpness. It's not even that expensive either, with only one level of handicraft required when augment slots are maxed. Pair that with the abundant sharpness reduction skills in the game, and it's possible to remain at purple sharpness longer or indefinitely. The second concept that buries the Deluxe Hatchet is the elemental value. Deluxe Hatchet may have 10 higher raw, but it has 11 less element. Remember what I said about sharpness values? It would be unwise to run the Megaton Shears without purple sharpness, so rather than tell you, I'm going to show you how much of a difference that makes. If the Deluxe Hatchet had similar or higher elemental values, it could have stood a better chance. So yeah, while Deluxe Hatchet may win in raw damage, it lacks the potential for further growth due to its stagnant sharpness and poor elemental stat. I have a running theory of mine that may sound crazy, but I believe a common theme in Rise and Sunbreak is to make the final boss weapon underwhelming, and make them even worse on the Switch Axe. Speaking of themes, this last weapon I've chosen actually has a combination of the aforementioned issues and an additional plight. Yes, I broke it down to a 1, 2, 3 kind of scenario. What can I say? Script plan and running stupid. Anyway, let me preface this next section with some axe knowledge. Switch Axe isn't like the other weapons that can settle for level 2 decoration slots and succeed. The unique Rampage decoration, File Switch Boost, is in some cases necessary for an axe and wildly shapes how you use the weapon. The reason is that morph attacks have more emphasis in this title than World, but unfortunately, morph attacks in Rise generate such little gauge back. With File Switch Boost, you gain a hefty amount back, which allows you to have more sword mode uptime. In base Rise, you only had Switch Charger to recover gauge, which conflicted with the zero-sum discharge and Soaring Wyvern combo. In Sunbreak, we now have access to 2-stage Morph Slash, which trades damage for utility in the form of gauge recovery. In order to maintain gauge at a reasonable amount with a level 2 Rampage decoration, you would need to use 2-stage whenever necessary, or have one of your scrolls equipped with Switch Charger. With File Switch Boost, you can maintain elemental burst counter on each scroll and not have to use 2-stage Morph Slash as often to get your gauge back. This is especially bad when you have to sacrifice potential stats from augment slots in order to get Rampage slot upgrade, as it can cost upwards of 4 to 7 slots. Hence why having a base level 3 augment decoration on a Switch Axe would be considered godly. With that out of the way, let's talk about Thunderclap. 310 raw, 74 element, white sharpness, no deco slots, level 2 Rampage slot, and element file. At max augment slots, it sits at 335 raw, 92 element, and purple sharpness. If it weren't for the level 2 decoration, it could have beat out its competition even with the lack of deco slots. Full Mark Plus has 330 base raw, 55 element, white sharpness, a 310 deco spread, and base level 3 Rampage slot, and at max slots it has 355 raw, 73 element, and remains at white sharpness with the potential to reach purple. Excusing the higher base raw and deco slots, Thunderclap sits at a higher element and sharpness, but that level 2 Rampage slot makes it rough. Full Mark is blessed with access to level 8 element boost and level 2 attack boost, which propels its stats to 360 raw and 108 element. If you run Thunderclap with the same augment spread, it would have 340 raw and 127 element. That would propel the weapon farther in terms of usefulness than the Full Mark, and yet that one little concept is holding it back. In order to slot in Rampage slot upgrade, the weapon loses a whopping 15 element, bringing it down to 112. That's just 4 higher than full mark. This is where the allure of the weapon fails, as you either play harder than necessary to maintain gauge with the 8 element 2 attack slots, or miss out on the high element to have 4 higher element than a weapon that has a higher base raw and actual decoration slots. Let alone if the set created slots in handicraft and a sharpness reduction skill. You want to see how full mark puts both the 8 element 2 attack and 6 element 1 rampage slot thunderclap to shame? Again, if it weren't for that Rampage decoration slot, these issues would not have mattered. TLDR, there are plenty of weapons that just barely make the mark for being equal to or greater than their peers, but a single stat can drastically alter their course in ways and make them less effective in the long run. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you haven't seen the previous episode, make sure to check it out. I'm still working on making all these weapons useful, but that video will be a pretty big one in due time. Thanks for watching, and until next time.